Should we start, Michel?
Yes, it's okay.
Great. All right. Welcome, everybody, to this fourth session of the South Africa-Netherlands Cybersecurity School. We're very happy to have you all online again today for the Cyber Resilience Game explanation by Michel Rademaker. Michel Rademaker is one of the co-founders and deputy director of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and thereby also the initiator and one of the organizers of this South Africa-Netherlands Cybersecurity School. Michel does a lot of research also on critical raw materials, all kinds of cyber-related risks, and leads a lot of projects here at HCSS. He will be explaining the cyber resilience game, what it entails, what you can learn from that, and the way forward with this. So, Michel, I would say glad that you're here, and the digital floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Berend, and I'm happy to be here. And as far as I can see, the numbers counting, it's still growing for today, so that's great. What I would like to ask Stephanie is to screen my PowerPoint, or it's you, Berend, I'm not sure. And then I will start explaining a bit what the series game is all about. So as soon as it screens, yeah, fantastic. Okay. So we're gonna play a serious game. So the first question, of course, what the heck is a serious game? Normally, if you were to play online games like World of Warcraft or other games, it is about trying to win from your opponents or try to collaborate with others to overcome an issue or all other kind of games actually that you probably are all familiar with. The idea of serious games is actually, and especially the one that you're going to play ideally the next coming days, is not so much a win or lose game, as well as I would say it is gamified analysis. So it is a analysis exercise packaged into a serious game, and it's serious because it's not just a fun thing in the sense of let's try to shoot some opponents, but it is to really critically think about, in this case, national cyber resilience of Southern Africa. And what I will do, I'll take you by the hand a bit on what it all is, how the game is designed, and I will also ask at some point Berend to showcase a bit how the technicalities of the game work actually. Next sheet, Stephanie, please. Yeah, so normally I would say, and this is an example of the Indian National Cyber Resilience, it sits in a box. But we also designed a couple of years back a fully digital version. So we can now play it over all time zones at the same time with hundreds of even thousands of people. So scale, and that's the interesting thing of being online, scale isn't an issue anymore. So next sheet, please. So what is this cyber game about? It's, as I said, a serious board game where you normally, if you play it tabletop, you can play it, 12 to 15. But having it in an online version, you could even, play it with 5,000. We so far didn't test it with those numbers, but I've been assured that is possible. So what is this serious gaming all about? Serious gaming, in the sense, especially this kind of game that you're going to play the next couple of days, is to support strategic discussions on what your organization is capable of and or is lacking. And your organization, in this case, is Southern Africa. Southern Africa. It helps to identify and consistently analyze capabilities, and I'll come back to what a capability is later on. And it is also supportive to try to map, if that will be arranged, and that will not be the case this case, but to map what are the available capabilities already. And I'll allude a bit to that later on, but it is interesting that we also use this for policy support, with smaller groups of decision makers, for example. The other interesting thing about this serious game is that it can help you identify and discuss possible new and or extra necessary capabilities. And that's an interesting one, because if you talk about cyber resilience on national level, this could be very huge. So what is the construct making it possible to get your head around that big question, actually? And that's what you will notice while playing the game, that this is possible. Of course, what's also possible often is that it is supportive in lessons learned identified and knowledge transfer on capability building with regard to, in this case, cyber resilience. So because you play with a lot of people, there's a lot to learn, for the fact that everybody, even if you're not an expert, will bring some knowledge to the table. And it could be what they call tacit knowledge, so you were not even aware that you had that knowledge. And it could be explicit knowledge, because you have studied on issues that are related to the gameplay, actually. What is also possible in this serious game is that you can also validate ambitions and goals. So, for example, if I would be a policymaker in the South African government, and I was responsible for cyber resilience, I might define some ambitions and some goals, and then this serious game could maybe help out in sorting out what that would mean and what it would take, actually. And in the end, it means also something in terms of capability thinking. How should you or could you think about capabilities as such? So this is still a bit extra, a bit of theoretical, but let's proceed to the next sheet, please. Okay, so the question is, what is a capability? Well, the syntax of the definition of a capabilities for this game is always the same. That is the ability to do something with an intended effect. So the ability to do something with an intended effect. And an example here is the ability to estimate various levels of danger from cyberspace to implement adequate protection measures. That's an example. And that could still be, in your terms, be abstract. But if you would peel it off, then you could say, okay, this is the general capability that, for example, Southern Africa needs. But how to specifically do that? And that would mean that you need to have capacities. So you have the capability, the ability to do something with an intended effect, and you have the capacity. And the capacity could, and I'll give you a very blunt example from a military perspective. So the ability to protect myself against an enemy in order to survive, that would be the capability. The capacity could be, I'll use a stone, I'll use a stick, I'll use a gun, I use a bomb, I use a rocket. And those would be capacities. So addressing a certain capability might still mean there's room for filling that in with the various capacities. So this is a bit of the theory about what is a capability and what is a capacity, as an example. Okay, next sheet, please. In order to address this all, you need what we would call an analytical framework. What you see here on screen is basically an Excel sheet with columns and with rows. And the columns in this case, and that we predefined for you for this game, is our strategic functions. So the organization or the system, in this case Southern Africa, as the system, needs to have 4 strategic functions and be capable of enabling those functions. So one would be protection and prevention. Another one will be threat reduction. A third one will be response. And potentially a fourth one would be deterrence. And deterrence, to clarify that a bit, that's the capability in combination with political will. So you are capable, but also you're willing to use your capacity. So that is, especially in defense terms, that's what deterrence is about. So that's the strategic functions. And you could discuss it and have 20 functions or 3 functions. But for this serious game, we said, okay, for being a cyber resilient nation or region, we have these 4 functions, strategic functions, to be well organized, filled with capabilities. And then you could look at functional areas. So that are the rows, actually. So you could think of, okay, what kind of diplomatic capability should I have to either do something on protection, threat reduction, response, or deterrence? Or maybe on counterintelligence? Or what about economic activities? What could we do, for example, in terms of prevention and protection, to support and prevent our companies to be less vulnerable to ransomware, for example? But you could also think, if you look at public-private partnerships, so what could private entities and what could public entities do to get Southern Africa more cyber resilient? So, so this is the framework. And if you then look for the combination of a strategic function and a functional area, then you're basically looking at a cell in the Excel sheet. And that's what you see on top of this sheet. So, and there you see in this case a card, because this is an example of the tabletop version. And you can then decide, okay, this capability is something that we need in terms of critical infrastructure protection, and especially with regard to response. And that would mean that you would fill that card and put it on critical infrastructure protection versus response in that cell. And that shows how the analytical framework works. It basically gives you a structure to think in a structural manner for the various functions of your system, in this case, South African cyber resilience, and which functional area your capability should be strengthened or be more mature or doubled or whatever you think would be important. And again, also the RAWs is a limited set of potential functional areas. You could define it in more detail, but that would only mean that you have many more cells in the matrix, and at some point that doesn't mean much anymore, especially not for the game that we're going to play, because this game is especially designed to get a bit more awareness. Okay, next sheet, please. Okay, so this is the last sheet. What I now would suggest is that we go and show the tool. So Berend, if you can do that.
Yes, I will get it up in a moment.
So while doing that, I'll explain a little bit ahead of Berend screening is the tool. So what we designed for you is this matrix. A set of capability cards. So we have pre-designed capability cards. So maybe first go to that tab of cards, Berend, if you want. So here you can scroll and you see 47 cards. And these are just examples, but overall, if you would all read them, you see that they might cover quite some ground already. What's now the idea behind this game is actually that you are being asked to play these cards, put them on the board, the digital board, But while doing so, you first have to, of course, get across the definition of the card. Let's say adopt. Number one, adopt and enforce economic sanctions. So if you would click on that, you'll see the description, the ability to adopt and enforce economic sanctions regimes against malicious actors in order, that's the effect, in order to prevent them from engaging in renewed attacks and hostile behavior. So that is a still broad discussion of a broad definition of the capability. And as I said, you could still think of these in terms of capacities. So what would be the capacities to fill this capability? But we play this game on capability level. So could you go back, please? Yeah. So so you have these cards. You don't have to play them all, but the more time you spend on it, the interesting it might get, because if you go over every card and study it a bit, you'll learn a lot of terminologies you might not be familiar with. Could either be on military or on prosecutors or on potential adversaries or on, well, emergency measures or promoting cyber hygiene. Those kind of terminology you learn while playing. So that's one. And then I think now, well, I would like you to do, Berend, to just give one demo on playing one card.
Yes, thanks, Michel. Okay, so when you reach this cyber game, and you would all have received a link by now to join the game. After this session, we will open it up, so then you can also access it. As of now, I'm showing you a pilot version, but your game will look the same. Well, when you log in, you reach the landing page where you find information on, well, what the game is like, the setup, just as Michel explained, and the scenario we're playing in this very game. So you can read up on that and then see what the imperative of this game actually is. And you can go to cards, just as Michel said, and you can play a card. Well, what that looks like, just let's take the first example again, adopt and enforce economic sanctions. What you do when you click a card, you, well, see the definition indeed, and you can decide where on the matrix, which is based on the capabilities and the functionalities, you will place the card. So just as an example, let's say I place it here. I click on place and I click on continue. Then the card, if you scroll back, will be placed here in this cell. What you then do, and that's a very important part of the game actually, is that you provide a reason for the choice of card and the choice of placement. So you work on an argument, well, which is directed towards your peer players, in which you explain why this card should be placed on that capability, and in which domain. And this argumentation is very important because this can, well, also explain to others why you think this card should be played. And you can also learn from the argumentation of your peers when looking at their cards. So you fill in your reason, you explain why you think this card should be placed where. And you can score on effect and costs if you want to. To be fair, in this game, we're not using that too much, but you can. Which is very important, and I want you to remember that because you should, in order to play the game successfully, is that when you have placed a card and you have provided your reason, you publish the card. We have seen people clicking on Save Draft, which is great for yourself, but if you want to play the game, you should click on Publish. And when you do that, you will see that the card is placed on the board. As of now, I see that it doesn't work because this is a pilot version, sorry for that, but you will see it placed here. So the number of your card, which was 1 in this instance, will be placed on this cell. And what you can do next is go to My Board. Well, again, sorry that doesn't show, but you will then see the 1 placed here in this cell where you place the card. And then you have an overview of all the cards you have played, and of course the argumentation that you provided behind it. If you go to Group Board, you can see the cards that the other players have placed. Important is that we have a threshold of 2 cards played for it to show on the group board. So you will have to also convince your co-players, your peers, for placing cards. That's why the argumentation part is very important. And here you can see which cards everyone wants to play on what domain and on what capability. And you can see the argumentation behind that. So you can see everyone's reasoning on why a certain card should be played.
Okay, great, Berend. Yeah, so it's, as I told you, it's an analytical game. And you can learn from all the terminologies, of course, but you can also learn quite a lot, I think, from all the arguments of the others. And if you look at the group board, you see on the right-hand top side a little word cards. So, Berend, if you click on that one, what it will show when all the cards are being played is the number of cards played. And when you hover over them, they light up in the matrix. So there you will see that some players might play card number 1 under protection and diplomacy. Oh, sorry. And others might play it under deterrence and military, for example. And that's okay. There's in this case, there's no right or wrong answer. But you could imagine that if you're the only one playing a card on economic and deterrence, and the rest does play it under diplomacy and protection, that you might be interested in the arguments why. Right? Because that's also an argument for you to dive into that argumentation to see what you can learn from it. Or you might be completely against it, and that is also something that you could respond to actually in this game. So if you spend some time on it, you can do this. So ideally, you can play it for a couple of days in a row, constantly, but I guess you don't find the time. You can also play it 15 times, logging in for just 5 minutes and play 1 card per issue or per instance. But ideally, I would like to at least ask everybody to maybe just start trying to play 20 cards as a kind of minimum, because then you'll get a gist. You'll learn a lot of the terminologies, and you also provide the others with your argumentations and your thinking, and that is useful for all. So this is basically how the game works. What we will do, and I think we will end up, we'll close the game again the day before the 1st of April. I think it's the last day of March, probably. And that gives us a bit of opportunity to look into the results. On the 2nd of April, we'll come back to you with some analysis. And what I then also love to do is actually have you all back and maybe have a bit of discussions on some of the cards played and the argumentations why. Because that would also be interesting for us and for me, but also for you again to say, okay, if you start thinking about how to get Southern Africa more cyber resilient, then that is interesting for us also to know. What we're probably gonna do on that same moment actually is the next stage of this game. And it will be the first time. But what we would like probably you all to do when you log in again, that we open the floor for voting. And that means that, for example, we give everybody 10 votes. So you can basically select 10 cards or capabilities that you think are the most important for getting the cyber resilience of Southern Africa on a higher level. And that will be interesting to also see what that means. So where the common thinking is what Southern Africa needs most in terms of cyber resilience. So we do initiate this game quite early in your curriculum, actually, because it might be that some of the questions that you have with regard to some of the topics at hand, the capabilities described, might be touched upon by the lecturers. So it is, I think, also a nice opportunity for you all to prepare yourself for various interesting lectures, because you might have heard some terminologies because it was in the game already. And that would then, again, I think, operationalize a bit further your knowledge about cyber resilience and capability thinking as such. So I think for this moment, I have gone through the stuff that I would like to explain to you. There might still be a little bit of time for maybe a couple of questions in the chat of things that might not be completely clear. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes. If some of these questions are raised, I try to answer them. And if there's no questions anymore in a couple of minutes, then I think we open the floor for you actually to start playing the game as soon as the link is active. So is there any question that someone wants to raise? And put them in the chat. I see, Berend, that in my chat function, the chat is turned off for this meeting, but maybe it could be activated.
We have, thanks, Michel. We have Q&A capabilities, so you can ask a question in the Q&A box.
Yeah, that's better. Sorry. Yeah.
I also see two people with their hand up. I could also let them speak up if they want to.
Okay, that's also a possibility. So then turn on the noise, so to say.
Okay, so we have Lucky Kunene with a question. Let's see if this works. You can unmute yourself now, I think.
I think there's a question that Povela asked, how do we get a link? I think the link was already distributed, but I could also imagine that Berend, you put us into in this one as well.
Thanks. Yeah, so let's do the questions via the Q&A box. I think that works better than doing it via the mic. Thank you for the question. You will all get the link through to your emails. Would you have not received the link after this meeting, then it would be good to reach out to us. And you can find our email address on the website, of course, and on the Eventbrite emails that you've been receiving. So would you not be able to get a link? In that case, please reach out and we can add you again to the game. Yeah, but in principle, via email.
I think what is important to mention as well, and that's we constantly stress that use the email that you use to subscribe to the course, because for this game you don't need passwords, but you are being identified already because we put in your email address in the game, and it means as soon as you log in, you get a reply mail to that email address that you provided. And then you have to click in your email box on that email link, and then you're in the game. So you don't need any passwords for that. Just to be sure that, and it might be that it ends up in the spam filter. So please check if that's the case.
Yes, thank you, Michel. We have a next question from Mark Harris, who asks, did I understand correctly that we will be playing in groups?
No, you're playing individual. So you can play overnight or in the morning or whenever you have energy for it. So that doesn't matter. So because all your play activities are being recorded, so everybody can see in the end what your scores were, what your arguments were. And you can, of course, also check with others what they have been arguing for a certain card. And I think there's also possibility to respond to that. So if you want to have a little bit of debate, that's possible, but that's asynchronic, as they say. So you don't need to be in the game at the same time. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions, but there might be.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, Natalie Monda and Lucky Kanani have their hands up.
If they could ask the question via the Q&A box, that would be working better. We tried unmuting, but it doesn't work. So please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box. I see one question that just came in, Michel. It's from Katlego
Oh.
Macabo, who asks, is cyber resilience a concept that can be achieved, especially that it requires a vast variety of stakeholders? Are there case studies of cyber resilience being achieved?
Oh, that's a good question. Cyber resilience is in that sense a moving target. In the early stages, when cyber was, well, almost in its instances of being developed, it was easier to be more to be cyber resilient than it is nowadays. If you'll be lecturing on things like ransomware, on DNSSEC, and all other cyber threats. So, and it's difficult to be ahead of the curve and to be sure that whatever happens, that your country is completely prepared for it. It's a kind of arms race in that sense. But of course, you could imagine that, and that's also why the game is here, that you might think about the way you construct your cyber resilience, combining various capabilities. So let me give you a very explicit example. Suppose that you have an evil intent and you want to attack another country with cyber capability. So you talk about offensive cyber capabilities. Then, of course, the question is, okay, can I do that? And if so, how vulnerable am I for myself? So in order to have cyber offensive capability, you probably first want to be sure that your cyber defense is high, because otherwise you will be wiped out in a couple of minutes. And this is precisely what the arms race in cyber is all about. There's constantly developments in getting more cyber resilient. But for example, if you heard of it, and you probably will be lectured about it as well, that a lot of tools have 0 days. So weak spots that might not be publicly in the public domain, but some hackers might find out there's a 0 day in a certain application, and then your resilience is basically flawed because they can get in via a pathway not familiar yet. And that means that as soon as that becomes public, organizations, companies, governments will try to prepare or to repair that flaw. And that's the kind of arms race that you constantly see. You see constant patches, you see new tools, you do better protection measures. You see countries organizing CERTs, so crisis response teams, to address these kind of questions. But the better, the more forward-leaning you are, potentially the better your cyber resilience is. But it means indeed, and that's another part of the question, it's a kind of whole of society responsibility. It's not only government, it's not only companies, it's also you as an individual being on the net and be aware of what you undertake, and that spoofing and spear phishing and those kind of things are understood by you, by the company, by the country. And that means also that we talk about cyber awareness, about understanding, but also about the capability to do stuff, to protect yourself, or to prevent things from happening. And that is something that you will learn in the game, because a lot of this will be addressed with the various capability cards that you're going to play.
Great answer to a great question. Thank you, Michel. There are some more questions in the Q&A box. One of the questions is, how many questions do we have in the game? I think that's good to reiterate that there's not questions, there's cards you can play, capabilities you can play, and that you can argue for those. There are 47 of those cards. The follow-up question is, can I review and change my answers after submitting?
Yes, you can.
and we would be happy to receive them. Thank you. The next question is the game suitable for beginners or is it more advanced?
I think it is for beginners, but it could also be for advanced. So the idea of this game is actually that by reading the cards and trying to understand what it is that you're trying to play, that you learn a lot. But you learn also a lot from the arguments of others. So it might be that you're not familiar with a certain element or capability set of cards because you never heard of it, and you cannot imagine what it is. But you might look for others that play that card and see what the arguments are, and you can learn a lot from that. So I think it's not necessary to be the super professional, and that's also not where this course is about. So I think it can be played by everybody.
Great. There's someone who is really looking forward to the game. That's obviously great to hear. A more technical question on the game itself, which might be best for now. So once a card has been placed and an argument has been made, can someone then dispute that argument? And can one dispute the dispute, for example?
Yeah, what I think is possible is that you can put your arguments and comment on it or comment on arguments of others. And especially if you would go to the group board and you hover over a certain card, and you click on it, you'll see all the arguments of everybody playing that card. So it is possible, yes.
Great. I'm looking through the questions. One more analytical question is, and I'm curious if you know this, Michel, from previous games we did with the Indo-Dutch Cyber School, for example, do response patterns in terms of how the cards are placed, are they usually similar or do they differ across various categories of players? So professionals, non-professionals, or maybe geolocational areas?
That's an interesting question, actually. And more in general, actually, if you talk about resilience, then resilience has a couple of elements in it. One is that, of course, you try to be ahead of the curve, and that means that you try to get capabilities in place to prevent from being attacked. And that's, in that sense, the best bang for the buck. If you're well prepared and you're not being attacked, then you hardly need any response capability because response is only necessary when the shit hits the fan. So what you normally see happening is that people tend to want to invest in capabilities to prevent. And that's smart because that's the cheapest investment. But in practice, of course, no country is completely cyber resilient. So you also have to invest in your response capability. And that's interesting in the sense that and I'm not aware completely of the cyber resilience of Southern Africa, but that means if you think that the preventive measures so much are not well in place, you might have to decide to put a bit more effort on response. Well, at the same time, response is expensive and only cleans up the rubble afterwards. So this is a bit of, balancing between the investments in both. And that's also, if you would be a policymaker, and that's what we suggest in this game, that you are in a strategic advisory committee advising the government to set up the cyber resilience and advice for a certain set of capabilities. And that's where the voting comes in. Because you can play all the cards, but at some point you say, hey, you can't have it all. But there's only money and effort for, let's say, 10 cards max. And that means that you have to pick and choose those 10 cards that you think have the most effect for creating better cyber resilience of Southern Africa.
Thank you. I've been answering some of the questions in the Q&A box already. There's one question. What happens if we play all our cards? Do we get an overall score?
No, you don't. It's not a matter of volume, but of what is useful. And again, you are allowed to play all the cards. By all means, please do, because you learn a lot of it. But in the end, we'll say, okay, in real life, there's only money and effort available for a certain amount. You have to make choices. So we will introduce, in that sense, scarcity. So you can't have all the things. If the sky is the limit, you could play all 47 cards. In practice, you probably cannot. So you have to be smart on what you think has the most value in your perspective. But please play all 47 cards if you want. Any other questions?
We have some broader background questions, Michel, on cybersecurity itself instead of the game. Is there a time for that now, or do we have to move on then?
No, I have time. So if there's interest, please.
All right. One of the questions is, collaboration is often encouraged. However, does it also not leave an entity vulnerable to a potential cyber attack? And if so, how does one retain a balance?
Well, yeah, this is a great question. If I just take the example of the Netherlands, is that we think it's to get cyber resilient, it's a multi-stakeholder approach that is required. And ideally, that you are as much as possible open. For example, open to share, maybe under certain conditions, your vulnerabilities after being attacked, for example, so that others can learn from it. Actually, this week, yesterday, in the Netherlands, in Parliament, there was a new initiative approved that does allude to risk and threat sharing among non-critical infrastructures. So, for example, critical infrastructures in the Netherlands is like the railways and the electricity and water management, and a couple of other banking, for example, finance. But of course, a lot of companies and organizations are not critical for, say, national security, but they do have an interest because they're companies, for example, trying to earn some money, and they might be targets for hackers in all kind of ways. So collaboration, and that's I think is very important to not only try to be less vulnerable, but also share awareness of most recent attacks and threats. And so that should, yeah, in my view, that should be encouraged a lot. Yeah.
Michel, it's Noel here. Could I please just ask you to explain the difference to the students between the resilience game and the cyber challenges?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the game is purely analytical and is trying to get you more aware of terminologies, structural thinking in terms of capabilities, as such. The challenge is a different kind of beast. So what we're gonna ask you while starting the challenge is that you will be put in smaller groups of, say, 10, 15 people max, and be provided a challenge from a company. And then you have a period of a couple of weeks together with the rest of your team to try to solve that challenge. And that could be and I'll not allude to the current challenges because we'll explain that later in the course. But to give you an example, an early one that we once had on the national railways in the Netherlands. And the challenge was quite simple, actually, but in terms of the question, but the answer was difficult. So the national railways said, okay, we need to update the software in our trains, but we have limited capacity. So we want to keep all trains running constantly. So is there a solution to update the software in the trains without getting them out of service? And that's an interesting one because you need to think about the technology, the processes, maybe even legal constraints. And that's also the reason why we will like to put people with various backgrounds in one team. And for two reasons. One is you learn to work a bit in a team, and you learn to appreciate various insights from other disciplines. Because in the end, in real life, if you start working in cyber, you'll probably be confronted with people with different backgrounds, and you need to understand their jargon, and they need to understand your jargon. And as soon as you start understanding both the jargons of both of you, then you can start really collaborating. So in general, this is a bit of the difference between the serious game and the challenges ahead. Any other questions?
Thanks, Michel. There's one good question from Peter Arl, who asks, do you know of any applications that are similar to this game that you can recommend to us for reference?
That's a good point. To be honest, no, I don't. I've not come across this kind of matrix games, actually. It's relatively, I think, unique. I did perform these kind of games on different topics, as I said, countering hybrid threats, climate and security, a couple of other topics. But normally, these kind of games do not facilitate so much this analytical rigor that you have to show while playing the game. So this is, I think, quite a unique one. But I'm very open. If someone knows a game that is a bit like this one, I'm really happy to know that, because then I'd like to have a chat with those people that have that game, actually. But I'm not aware of it yet.
All right. Thanks, Michel. Next question, which is also more broad and not strictly related to the game. Does cyber resilience have levels of compliance or a matrix to which one may compare their readiness or resilience? Where would one find this standard or market norm, if it exists?
Yeah, that's a good one. There are, so Oxford University is working a bit on this. So if you would Google it, you'll probably find some work on it. But that's old stuff already. We once did a report, I think it's maybe 7 or 8 years back, on national cyber resilience, where we compared various countries on various indicators. But so if you would Google and try to find something on Oxford and cyber resilience or national cybersecurity, you'll find some information there. I think that's a quite often referenced source, actually. So you might have a look there.
All right, thank you, Michel. I think there's no more questions coming in at this point. Might be good to reiterate one final time to everyone, if you have not received the link to the game, say end of today, because we are opening it up soon, please let us know via email, which is cyberschool@hcss.nl. You can also find it on the website and on all the SANCS24 accounts. There you can reach out. Would you not receive a link, let's say, end of today? Thank you for it. I think that's it, Michel. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope that everybody is enthusiastic to start playing the game. You can play it 10 times or once for 2 hours. It's up to you. I'm looking forward to seeing the results and be back with some analysis on your results on the 2nd of April.
That's great, Michel. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys.